Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And I'm so thrilled today to be talking about the wonderful film Antebellum with directors Gerard and Christopher Renz, who also wrote it. And I wanted to ask a question about the writing process first, because I thought it was so fascinating that it started out as a short story that was written. And so I was really interested in the journey of taking a medium and a piece of writing that you'd created and figuring out how to shift it for the screen.
It's funny. Like when we first started writing the short story, we didn't have any idea that we were going in the direction of a full length feature. And I think once we were moving into that process in earnest, we wanted to make something that felt in a way like this was a piece of literary material that we needed to be cognizant of honoring at all times, that the source material should be sort of a roadmap to how we would make the movie visually, the cadence, the pacing, all of what I had experienced in that nightmare, and then how that transferred into the short story. We wanted that crispness and that sense of disorientation and that sense of I am in a nightmare, but I don't know it. And then I wake up from the nightmare at the end, which is one of the reasons that we were so really specific and determined that we would bookend the film starting at the gloaming at sunset and then concluding at the sunrise, the dawn of a new day, and then smash cutting to Antebellum, where it feels like what I experienced in the nightmare, that I wake up and it just cuts without any explanation. Like I had this experience. And so we wanted to transfer that to the screen from that source material. That I think was the most important thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting the way that you were just mentioning a lot of the idea of the pacing and the cadence and the rhythm of what it was going to feel like even when you were writing the short. And that was one of the bits of the script writing process that I was really fascinated in what that looked like and what the challenges were, because particularly when we look at that really visceral opening scene, it's several minutes into the film before we hear anyone talk. Mm-hmm. And I was curious about the challenges that that presents in terms of writing and having to be so much more detailed, but not over detailing, because you're still writing a script, so you don't want it to be completely just dense pages. And at the same time, how that also really helped the filmmaking process, because you had to go into so much detail and really figure out exactly what that visually was going to look like.
Well, I'd say that, this is the first script that we ever wrote. So we weren't aware of a lot of the rules. So we just, wrote what we were thinking as we were envisioning it, not even thinking at that point that dialogue wasn't occurring until 7 or 8 minutes into the film. But no, we knew so little about it that we didn't even realize that there was a program that really helps you with the writing process. Final Draft. We wrote the whole thing in Microsoft Word, trying to figure out the spacing and all that. But no, I think it ended up helping us that we didn't know a lot of the traditional rules
within script. I think it's really important that we clarify, like for us, we are writers, but we had not written a script. You know what I mean? So like there's a very the rules are, I just want to make sure that that we're clear in communicating that like the rules as it relates to writing a script are very different. And I agree with C wholeheartedly about I think that it proved advantageous in a sense that we were so descriptive and that it was so dense, the material, in terms of making something that felt literary and that you could imagine yourself in a book. And so, especially as first-time directors that were going after best-in-class department heads and really accomplished actors, I think that it was something that was really beneficial, because those people could understand exactly what the vision that we had for the movie, because we were so detailed about every little thing. Like you would think in a sense that like the shooting script, some of the people that were, talking with us from the department had said that the shooting script, that they wouldn't even really need us because of how detailed we were, that basically you already knew that we, right down to a detail of a very specific can of grease and what it was and the coloring and that it was slightly rusted. And like all of those little details were really important to us in terms of how we were describing the film.
Yeah, I feel like I want to read your script now.
Oh, you
and
should.
I wanted to talk about that opening sequence because I just thought it was so stunningly filmed and what you did in introducing characters and, bringing the audience not just into the world of the film, but really kind of making us feel like we're there in the moment. And the film has a lot of moments like that, which feel very experiential, particularly in the Antebellum scenes. And I was curious about how that opening sequence really came together and even just the logistics of, how you had to kind of map out all of the choreography of the camera work along with the cast to make sure that you were getting all of these different elements from like sweeping landscapes to like real close-ups of characters when you wanted them as well.
Yeah, it was we went over the concept of that opening oneer with our DP Pedro Luke, and planned it for all the weeks in pre-production, knowing that it would be difficult. But it was 10 times more difficult than that. I mean, we also, it was a half a mile from the front of the house to the back of the house to the end of the shot. But then knowing that we needed to get the shot right at sunset only gave you 1 or 2 goes at it per day. So it was complicated, but we're really happy that we invested the time and eventually got it. I think on the 5th or 6th day.
We really treated it like a stage operation, like we were doing an opera, and thank God we had Gary Marcus, who is such a brilliant AD in terms of understanding what we needed for choreography and that everything needed to go just right every time. To further underscore what C was saying, I mean, it was incredibly frustrating at times because the ground was really soggy. The equipment is incredibly heavy, and our camera operator was having a difficult time, and at one point collapsed when we were just halfway through when the stagecoach was going by. Another time, I think that there was something in the shot that ruined it. It was perfect, but that person, and they felt so bad because they were part of crew, and we didn't make a thing of it, but we just kept trying and trying and trying. But again, I think because we treated it like an opera or a stage, like we were doing something live. I think going in it with that mentality probably made it a little bit more palatable than it would have been otherwise. Because if we were just thinking within the mechanics of film, it probably would have felt too daunting.
And every time we didn't get it, it was a big deal because we had under $10 million for this and 26, 27 days, I think, and we were not getting any more. So we needed to make sure that we that we got it in a decent amount of time.
And you've mentioned that with your cameras, you really wanted to have the lenses from Gone with the Wind. And so I wanted to ask about how you feel that really elevated and enhanced a lot of the shots that you made, but also the kind of like behind the scenes logistics of filming with those specific lenses.
I mean, for us, it was also psychological. It was a sense of justice in a way, because we took those lenses, and Gone with the Wind is an extraordinary movie, a beautiful film, but it's also propaganda, and it was used to really effectively misinform and to give people this idea of a romanticized version of the antebellum South. So for us, that part of it, I guess what I'm trying to say is that beyond the mechanics of what the lenses could actually produce, just our having the knowledge that we have the exact lenses in our possession and that we could go and correct the record with them, and that it's with any film, you really don't understand where it will land and how it will stand the test of time. There are conversations that are happening today where there are a group of people that are trying to undo the legacy of The Godfather, which I think is one of the most brilliant movies ever. But also, I'm not an Italian American, so I don't know, what parts of that film an Italian might find particularly offensive in terms of, trying to have to get over stereotypes. So for me, as a Black artist, I felt like we had a responsibility to our audience to make sure that we could correct the record with those lenses. Outside of that, when we saw the finished product in terms of the prismatic colors and the sort of technicolor visual that really, I think on a subconscious level, feels reminiscent of Gone with the Wind. So I think that it achieved that without our having to, beat you over the head with it. It was more subtle in that way. And we're really fortunate that we had a DP as I think that Pedro Luke is as much an artist and a painter in understanding how we wanted to paint all of those scenes as he is a DP. And so I don't know if you did experience that much of a difference when we were using the other lenses than we were when we were using the Gone with the Wind lenses. They all felt sort of seamless, other than when we did use those lenses. There was a lot of ceremony around it because we were like, yeah, like this is, we are on hallowed ground at this actual plantation, filming our movie with the lenses from Gone with the Wind. It felt like there was a weight to it, and that we should honor that and we should respect it and make it a real part of our process, which I think we did.
Yeah. And you were just mentioning the fact that you did choose to film this on a real plantation location. But I know that you also kind of like set in place some things to be really respectful of the place as well. So you weren't filming inside the huts where slaves had been previously kept. You actually created your own locations a little bit further down in the grounds. What were some of the other things that you did within that location, just based on, that respectfulness of the space and thinking about how you really wanted to honor the story through the way that you were utilizing it in your film?
Look, we were always aware that the ancestors were omnipresent on that property. And one of the first things that we did when we got there, the lady that owns the property, she requires that everyone goes and communes with those cabins, that you go and you do a tour and you spend some time by yourself. What I found really interesting while on the plantation was that there seemed to be a general respect for this open air haunted house. There wasn't a lot of, with the exception of the one that we had to shoot, which was a lot of, we couldn't even use the audio because Christopher was yelling and directing people which place to go. But outside of that, there was a general sort of respect where I don't know if you've ever been to Muir Woods in Northern California, but the redwoods, the sequoias, when you go there, people just sort of naturally whisper. They don't yell, they don't raise their voices. It feels like a temple. It feels like something you should respect. The crew, that's what it felt like on the plantation, and we wanted to make sure that we were respectful of the people that were kidnapped and enslaved and forced into free labor at the end of a gun barrel. We made our own cotton fields. We made our own cabins for the enslaved people. We actually didn't shoot. We tried the best that we could, with the exception of the actual main plantation house, not to even put the cabins on film. So even though that was really kind of difficult because they were right down the path, but we tried to do everything that we could in having an omnipresent awareness of the ancestors and wanting to respect that property.
And in terms of how that relates to working with your cast in that space, I was interested in that as well, because Janelle Monáe and a lot of the cast in these scenes are having to step into a place of trauma with what they're portraying through their characters. So what was the journey of working with them and creating a space that still at the end of the day was able to bring them out of it when they needed it, let them live in that space when they really needed to, and just kind of like really took care of them on an emotional level in the way that I imagine they would have needed for a project like this and what they were having to convey on film?
We had a lot of really in-depth conversations before we even shot the film and before we all decided to work together. It was paramount to us that we not in any way serve as co-conspirators in the erasure of our own shared history, which means that we're not going to give you this version of the antebellum South where these abuses were not taking place. It was important that we were respectful and truthful and authentic about the past. That's the point. But I think when we were in these spaces, especially with Janelle, it was important that instead of being two dudes that would go into the cabin and sort of surround her with notes and having a conversation about what we've just seen, we thought that it was really important to have almost a closed set, in that either Christopher or myself, he and I would have a conversation, and one of us would, in some cases it was Christopher, in some cases it was me, within 5 feet of each other on the other side of a curtain, but giving that space where Janelle and Kiersey for that matter, didn't feel crowded, in a very small space with a lot of pressure in wanting to feel that they were remaining grounded in the character and being respectful of the history. And we wanted them to be able to go to these places to dive really deep within themselves, to cleave their way toward what some of these people had to have experienced. It needed to feel authentic, understanding that this is a modern Black woman or modern Black women that find themselves in this situation. So obviously you're not talking to them about, what it was like to be yanked from your home in the original motherland, but yanked from your home in modern America. That was a part of the methodology that we were looking to apply in making the film, in recontextualizing this country's original sin and putting through a modern sort of lens and context, so that people can understand that all of these folks had a before, that they were pillars of community, they were mothers, they were wives, and we don't get the before. And so I think that understanding what the goal and objective of what we were doing and constantly reminding ourselves of that, I think that automatically created a safe space, because we were all there for the right reasons, and we had the conversation about what it was, what it should look like, and how we needed to be respectful to the past.
And with Janelle's performance, one of the things that is so powerful about what she conveys is just this undercurrent of stoicness. And there's so much going on beneath the surface, particularly in those early scenes where we're not hearing her talk very much. And I thought it was interesting that you've described that idea of like someone having to kind of present face and not really kind of say what they're feeling, but meanwhile they're just completely screaming with anguish on the inside. And I thought that was such a fascinating analogy for her character as a whole, given that culmination scene where she is just kind of riding a horse and screaming at the end, even though we still don't actually hear the noise of it. And so I wanted to ask about the way in which you took that feeling and really just carried it through in all of those scenes with her.
I mean, we originally entered the conversations with Janelle and her people about Antebellum because of that stoicism, because of that quiet power, how she's able to emit such a potency of emotion non-verbally. And so I think her being able to sit with herself, having a lot of conversations with us prior, because it was crucial that once we started shooting, we weren't crowding her, that we all had an understanding of who this character was. Almost, it's quite Helen Keller in a sense, this non-verbal, this need to not only bury your emotions just so that you could survive the day, but also not giving away anything about what could be in the planning or what you're doing, that is trying to figure out how you're going to liberate yourself and others from this situation. So I think that, and I don't know if I'm really answering your question, I think that emotion, that quiet power, we were able to maintain that because as a preamble, before we even got to the set, we had ongoing in-depth conversations about Veronica, Eden, the motivation, why she makes certain choices, and how Janelle, as an artist, as an actor, what she would do with those choices, and to let her have the freedom and the acreage between herself and us as the filmmakers and the writers. I mean, we're the author of the film as well, which makes it, I think there's an additional pressure from some of the actors when you're working with filmmakers that it's their script, the complete vision was ours. And so we were very specific in what we wanted. And a bit obsessive compulsive about that. And we have a self-awareness. And so it was important that we had the clarity with all of our actors, including our lead and Janelle, before we got on set, so that then people could be free to really ground themselves in these characters and in this place.
Mm-hmm. And then when you jump into the scenes where, it's Janelle kind of like in her life with her family, with her friends, and we're seeing, that fully enriched side of the life that she has. I thought that the camera choices and the visual choices you made there were so interesting, particularly in terms of like using a lot of low angles and really with characters that kind of come in and maybe seat them at a table in a restaurant that we don't ever see their faces. It really is just focused on, who we need to be seeing, and very much through her perspective, but with such a strong lens with that. So how did you set about figuring out the way that visually you wanted to completely turn everything that you'd been capturing up to that point on its head and have such a different, distinct style, and what you wanted to convey with that, with those choices?
Yeah, that was we had a lot of conversations with Pedro, our DP, about that, because using the Gone with the Wind lenses on such a giant plantation, that there's an odd beauty to it, to then switching to this modern context, we did want it to be jarring, but also there needed to be some kind of connective tissue. So a lot of the way the shots were set up, we tried to mirror a little bit from the shots on the plantation, while knowing that the plantation never really left. It was always there, whether it was in a painting behind them or someone who was from the dining hall on the plantation that was in the hotel. We always tried to keep that connection. But the second act was also really important because it was important to show where we want to go as a society. Obviously, we see all of these microaggressions throughout the second act, but we also introduce Dawn, played by Gabrielle Sidibe, who really, just is such a breath of fresh air, but also she represents this place of where we want to go, who you want to be, and just, navigating life, not even paying any attention to, all of those microaggressions that are around you, just moving through it in a positive way.
I think that a lot of I think that Black people, what a lot of other people don't understand about our experience is that there is a refusal to serve as sort of these co-conspirators in our own dehumanization. And so when you see them at the restaurant, that's how we perceive our own experience and our own lives. It's like Charlie Brown and the adults. It's, I'm going to live in my space and enjoy my dinner and have a great evening with my friends. And I'm not going to let this particular microaggression or these people derail another opportunity for me to experience joy. And so,
but I'm not going to swallow it and just let it go.
Right. It's like I've dealt with it. That's over. And now it's us. You know what I mean? And so that's what we were trying to communicate. That's what we were trying to convey. And we also thought it was really important that these women, that we kind of pay homage to Goodfellas in a sense, and just getting, this round table of giving a certain weight to a conversation among women, among really good friends, and that has its own value and that has its own weight, and it should be shot in it's not trivial. It should be shot in such a way that you give it the weight and the seriousness that it deserves.
The entire restaurant shot with the women around the table was a tracking shot around the table. There was constant movement on the camera, no coverage.
Because we only wanted that shot.
That's how we wanted it to be seen.
And I'd love to hear about the journey of how that final scene came together in terms of just like the choreography and it being so stunning when you've got Janelle riding on that horse, you're filming everything and you've really slowed it down into slow motion, the composition of the music, and just there's so many elements, and no matter what part of the frame you're looking in, there's just so much detail that you've managed to throw into there, and it really is just such an emotionally cumulative point for the film, intentionally so. And so I'd love to hear about how that came together and why you made the specific choices that you did visually with that.
Well, that shot, the way that Christopher and I had envisioned it in our head almost since day one, we could not wait to get to that day, because that was victory. Veronica's name means she who brings victory, and we wanted this moment of catharsis for both she and the audience, but also a metaphor for the experience of being Black in America, which is to say that I have survived this. I am going toward a better thing, but not unscathed, not without scars, not without carrying those experiences on an ancestral level and on a personal level in my own life. But I also think for us, we wanted for the audience to be indoctrinated yet again or seduced into the idea or the belief that perhaps she's gone through some sort of time warp, and now these are the Confederates and what is happening. And it's not until she passes by that Antebellum sign that for some people it all comes together. And so I think a big part of it was wanting to play with the audience, that we wanted it to feel epic and really persuasive, that this was, right down to the gold brass cannons. Like, we were very specific and we wanted it to feel, super victorious, because when you think about it, a reenactment park, as Veronica is making her victorious run through that would appear somewhat sort of ridiculous on its face, that these people are that ridiculous, that this is what they're doing. But in filming it in this way, and hopefully, and in capturing the dawn of a new day, and getting all of the emotion and the sweat and the blood and the audacity to survive that is in the expression of her eyes, and then also the smash cut of ending the film abruptly with just Antebellum on the screen. Christopher was really determined that the plane, because the plane meant so much to us, because we oftentimes think about how these planes of certain people are flying over so much suffering that they don't even realize is happening on their way to some spectacular place, or on their way to see friends or do business, that right underneath them, 30,000 feet down, could be this kind of suffering, where people are made to live in what is a reimagined antebellum South, while the modern world is existing and moving forward on a parallel track. And so at the end, when the plane appears yet again, which is supposed to symbolize what Veronica's daughter had written or had painted in the drawing with the plane, that was her self-soothing, that was her ability to anchor herself still with her family. And so when the plane hits the edge of the screen and goes black, and it's going that direction, and you go back to when she told her daughter, when you see that giant airplane, you'll know that's mommy coming home to you. And that is what we wanted to communicate with that shot.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank both of you for sharing all of this about the film, and congratulations with everything. Thank you so much for taking time today.
We appreciate you having us. Thank you.